On December 3, 2025 at noon in the Gobi Desert of Inner Mongolia, Landspace's Zhuque-3 rocket lifted off from the Dongfeng Commercial Aerospace Testing Area. The launch looked perfect. Stage separation succeeded cleanly. The booster began its powered descent, grid fins deployed, and engines ignited for the landing burn. Everything appeared to be working exactly as planned. China's answer to SpaceX's reusable Falcon 9 was about to achieve what Chinese rocket engineers had been working toward for years. Then, 3 kilometers above the desert floor, something went catastrophically wrong. The booster's engines experienced abnormal combustion. The controlled descent became an uncontrolled fall. The rocket disintegrated in a fireball, crashing in pieces across the landing zone. China's first attempt at SpaceX-style orbital booster recovery ended in a spectacular failure, captured on camera and broadcast worldwide. 20 days later, on December 23, 2025, China tried again. This time, it was not a commercial startup. It was the national team, the Long March 12A, part of China's official space program. Same launch site in the Gobi Desert. The mission profile was the same: reach orbit, separate the booster, and return it for a vertical landing. The payload reached orbit successfully. The booster began its return sequence, and then the same thing happened. Engine restart problems, thrust shortfall, loss of attitude control, and then an explosion. Wreckage scattered 2 to 4.5 kilometers from the intended landing site. 2 attempts at reusable rocket recovery in the same month from the same desert by different organizations using different rockets, both ending in fireballs near the landing zone. Today, we are going to examine why China's attempts to copy SpaceX's reusable rocket technology keep failing, what technical challenges they are struggling to overcome, and why this matters far beyond just rocket landings. By the end, you will understand that the race to master reusable rockets is not just about launch costs. It is about military communications, satellite constellations, and strategic competition where China is trying to catch up to SpaceX's 10-year head start. Let's start with understanding what SpaceX actually does and why it is so difficult, because appreciating the technical challenge reveals why copying it is harder than it looks. SpaceX's Falcon 9 rocket launches, delivers a payload to orbit, and then brings the first stage booster back to land vertically, either on a land pad or on an autonomous drone ship at sea. That sounds simple when described in one sentence. The engineering is anything but simple. After stage separation at approximately 80 kilometers altitude and while traveling several thousand kilometers per hour, the booster must flip around using cold gas thrusters, deploy grid fins for aerodynamic steering, survive hypersonic re-entry through the atmosphere that generates extreme heat, reignite its engines multiple times for precise burns that slow the descent, maintain a perfect vertical orientation, and touch down gently on the landing pad, all entirely autonomously with no human control. Every phase creates different simultaneous challenges. The grid fins must steer accurately through plasma during re-entry when aerodynamic forces are enormous. The engines must restart reliably after being shut down in vacuum and after extreme thermal cycling. Guidance algorithms must calculate an optimal trajectory in real time, adjusting for wind, atmospheric conditions, and actual performance versus predicted. Landing legs must deploy perfectly and absorb touchdown forces without damage. SpaceX began working on reusability around 2012. Their first successful landing was December 21, 2015, after years of development, multiple failures, and iterative improvements. They achieved the first booster reflight in March 2017. By 2018, they had scaled to commercial reuse operations. By the end of 2025, according to reports, SpaceX conducts 100-plus launches annually with a 97%+ recovery success rate. They reuse individual boosters 30-plus times and have normalized the entire process so that successful landings are routine rather than newsworthy. That's 10-plus years of development, hundreds of test flights, accumulated data from dozens of failures, continuous refinement of software and hardware, and institutional knowledge built through extensive operational experience. China is trying to replicate this achievement without the decade of iterative development SpaceX invested. Now let's examine exactly what went wrong with both Chinese attempts, because the failures reveal specific technical gaps. For the Landspace Zhuque-3 launch on December 3rd, the chief designer said execution was nearly perfect until the final moments. Grid fins deployed correctly, attitude control worked as designed. From 80 kilometers altitude down to 40 kilometers, 3 engines ignited to slow the descent. Guidance during re-entry in the glide phase was described as basically perfect. But at approximately 3 kilometers above ground in the final landing burn phase, the engines experienced abnormal combustion. Without proper thrust, a soft landing became impossible. The booster crashed and exploded. Everything worked until the last few seconds. Then catastrophic failure. The Long March 12. A failure on December 23rd followed a remarkably similar pattern. The booster initiated the landing burn sequence. Engines experienced restart or performance problems, resulting in insufficient thrust. The rocket lost attitude control without proper engine thrust to stabilize. It crashed near the target landing zone and exploded on impact. 2 different rockets, 2 different organizations, one commercial and one a national program, the same fundamental failure mode. Engines not providing reliable thrust during the critical final landing phase. This is not coincidence. It is a pattern that reveals a common technical bottleneck in China's reusability efforts. In both cases, the payload reached orbit and the primary mission succeeded. But booster recovery failed at the same critical moment, the final landing burn, when engines must provide precise, reliable thrust at low power levels. This pattern suggests China has mastered many aspects of the re-entry sequence, but struggles with one of the most technically demanding phases. Now we will examine the 3 core technical challenges the video identifies that China is struggling with, because these explain why the failures keep happening. First, deep throttle stability and multi-engine parallel control, especially for liquid oxygen and methane engines under extreme throttling with multiple relights. Landing burns require engines to operate at very low thrust levels, sometimes 20 to 30% of maximum thrust, to avoid overthrust that would cause the rocket to hover or bounce. Operating engines at such low thrust is technically challenging because combustion becomes less stable. Add multiple restarts after engine shutdown in vacuum conditions, and the difficulty compounds. SpaceX's Merlin engines were specifically designed and extensively tested for deep throttling and multiple relights. Years of development went into ensuring reliable combustion across wide thrust ranges. China's liquid oxygen and methane engines have apparently not achieved that reliability yet, and both failures suggest combustion instability during the low-thrust phases that are critical for landing. Second, precise attitude control during hypersonic re-entry. When the booster re-enters the atmosphere at several thousand kilometers per hour, aerodynamic forces are enormous. Grid fins provide steering, but the plasma environment during re-entry, combined with extreme dynamic pressure and rapidly changing conditions, makes accurate guidance extraordinarily difficult. Small errors in wind field prediction or guidance calculations can cause significant position errors by the landing phase. According to the analysis in the video, China has gaps in wind field prediction accuracy and guidance algorithms compared to SpaceX's battle-tested systems, refined through hundreds of flights. Even if engines work perfectly, being off target by several kilometers at landing means failure. Third, multi-system integration and reliability. Landing successfully requires landing legs, heat protection, dampers, engine relights, guidance computers, hydraulic systems, and numerous other components all working together flawlessly. If any single system fails, the entire landing fails. The video claims China has gaps compared to SpaceX in materials technology, extreme testing regimens, and system-level reliability engineering. SpaceX has landed boosters hundreds of times, identifying and fixing countless subtle integration issues through operational experience. China is in the early stages where each flight reveals problems they did not anticipate. This is normal for new technology development, but it means they are years away from SpaceX reliability levels. The chief designer said guidance was basically perfect until 3 kilometers, which suggests the guidance algorithms worked adequately for most of the descent. The failure at the final landing burn points specifically to engine performance and thrust control as the critical weakness. This narrows the technical challenge China needs to solve, but it does not make progress easier. Engine reliability during landing is perhaps the single most critical component of the entire system. Now let's talk about the culture and organizational factors the video emphasizes, because these might matter as much as hardware. SpaceX normalized failure as part of the development process. Early Falcon 9 landing attempts failed spectacularly. Boosters crashed, exploded, tipped over, and missed the drone ship entirely. SpaceX published videos of these failures, openly discussed what went wrong, incorporated lessons learned, and tried again quickly. This fast iteration loop, fail, diagnose, redesign, and fly again, enabled rapid improvement. The video argues that China's approach to handling failure differs significantly. Chinese state media reportedly avoided calling the December crashes failures, instead framing them as valuable data collection or basically successful. The payload reached orbit, so mission success. But the booster recovery, the entire point of demonstrating reusability, failed catastrophically. Calling this basically successful obscures the reality that the primary reusability objective was not achieved. This matters because rocket development, particularly reusability, requires accepting many failures as inevitable steps toward success. If political or cultural pressures demand declaring every attempt basically successful regardless of outcome, it creates incentives to minimize problems rather than confront them directly. Engineers might hesitate to report issues. Leadership might not allocate resources to address fundamental problems. The iteration cycle slows. The video says the basically successful framing generated public mockery on Chinese social media, suggesting domestic audiences recognize the spin and do not accept it. This creates a different problem. If official messaging lacks credibility, it undermines public confidence not just in this program, but in government statements generally. The explosion itself is not the credibility problem. The dishonest framing afterward creates bigger damage. SpaceX also benefits from decision autonomy and a funding ecosystem that rewards high-risk experimentation. Elon Musk can authorize another test flight quickly without lengthy bureaucratic approval processes. Private investors tolerate failures as long as progress continues. That tolerance enables the rapid iteration that accelerates development. Chinese rocket programs, even nominally commercial ones, often have state connections, government oversight, and political considerations that affect decision-making. The video suggests this creates a slower, more risk-averse development culture that hinders the iterative approach reusability requires. If every failure requires extensive investigation, political clearance, and careful public messaging before the next attempt, the pace of development slows dramatically compared to SpaceX's approach. Let's examine China's organizational approach to catching up, because understanding the structure reveals both advantages and limitations. China uses what the video calls a wolfpack strategy. combining national programs including Long March rockets from China, Aerospace Science and Technology Corporation institutes, with multiple commercial companies, some with deep state ties. Launch volume has increased dramatically, from 39 launches in 2020 to over 90 in 2025, with roughly 70 national and 20 commercial launches. The video highlights 3 major commercial players pursuing reusability. Landspace focuses on liquid oxygen and methane technology with its Zhuque-3 series, the rocket that failed December 3rd. They have positioned themselves as Chinese innovators in methane propulsion, similar to SpaceX's shift from kerosene to methane for future vehicles. Interstellar Glory emphasizes rapid response capabilities and solid fuel rockets, though solid fuel makes reusability extremely difficult. Their niche appears to be military and emergency launch services rather than commercial reusability. Space Pioneer targets Falcon 9 class capability with Tianlong-3, planning a maiden flight in 2026 with sea recovery goals using their own pad in Hainan. They are explicitly copying SpaceX's approach most directly. The video also notes financial pressures and consolidation. For example, X-Space has faced losses. Shareholders have sold stakes, and there have been rebranding and ownership changes. The argument is that long research and development cycles for reusability, combined with weak short-term profits, mean many companies will fail before achieving success. Only those with sustained funding, whether from government backing or patient investors, will survive the development timeline required. This creates an ecosystem with both advantages and disadvantages. Multiple competing approaches increase the chance that someone succeeds, and they enable parallel development of different technologies. But the same plurality fragments resources and duplicates efforts that could be coordinated. The balance between competition driving innovation and coordination achieving efficiency remains uncertain. Now let's talk about why reusability matters beyond just launch costs, because the strategic implications drive the urgency. Expendable rockets throw away the most expensive hardware, the engines, structures, and avionics after single use. This makes spaceflight extraordinarily expensive. Reusability transforms economics by turning buying a rocket into renting a flight. The hardware gets reused dozens of times, dramatically reducing marginal cost per launch. SpaceX's reuse of Falcon 9 boosters drove costs down so significantly that legacy providers like Arianespace and Russia's space program lost commercial market share. The economic advantage of reusability is not just incremental improvement, it is transformation that makes competitors non-viable. But beyond economics, there is a military and strategic dimension the video emphasizes heavily. SpaceX's Starlink constellation provided communications in Ukraine after conventional infrastructure was targeted. This demonstrated that low Earth orbit satellite constellations are strategic military infrastructure, not just commercial internet service. China wants similar capability for potential Taiwan scenarios or South China Sea conflicts. Having secure, resilient satellite communications that cannot be easily disrupted gives enormous military advantage. For domestic security and surveillance, satellite coverage enables capabilities that ground-based systems cannot match. Building huge constellations, thousands or tens of thousands of satellites, requires launch capacity that only reusable rockets can economically provide. Without reusability, launching enough satellites to create comprehensive coverage becomes prohibitively expensive. Reusability enables the kind of rapid, large-scale deployment that makes mega-constellations viable. Let's examine the International Telecommunication Union. The ITU manages orbital slots and radio frequencies through international coordination. The system operates partly on a first-come, first-served basis with milestone requirements. Countries or entities must demonstrate progress by launching certain percentages of filed satellites by specific dates, or they risk losing their slot allocations. According to the video, Chinese entities filed for over 200,000 satellite positions with the ITU by the end of December 2025. This massive filing serves multiple purposes. It stakes a claim to orbital real estate before competitors, it creates negotiating leverage in international coordination discussions, and it sets ambitious targets that require rapid launch capability to meet milestones. But actually launching 200,000 satellites requires launch capacity that does not currently exist anywhere. Only reusable rockets could make such deployment economically feasible. China's urgency to master reusability is not just about matching SpaceX's technical achievement, it is about enabling the launch capacity needed to actually deploy these filed constellations before losing the slots. This creates pressure to move fast, potentially faster than prudent technical development timelines suggest. The December 2025 failures might partly reflect this pressure, pushing for landing attempts before systems are fully ready because delay means losing competitive position. So what does all this mean for the space race between SpaceX and China's rocket programs? China is in the early stages of a learning curve that SpaceX climbed over 10 years. The December failures are not surprising. They are expected growing pains of developing complex new technology. SpaceX had similar failures in early reusability development. The question is whether China can iterate and improve as quickly as SpaceX did, and whether organizational culture permits the rapid iteration necessary. Do not forget to subscribe for analysis on space technology reshaping strategic competition. Thanks for watching.